With the release of Intel's 12th gen CPUs, we immediately went out and tried to get as many 12-something Ks as we could until we realized that CPUs are not as cheap as fans and that we can afford exactly one. But at least it's the very best. Intel's biggest yet, 16-core, 24-thread, 125 watts TDP. Yeah, I guess we all know that is not going to happen. But no matter how you look at it, it is one beast, and a beast needs a beast of a motherboard. Meet ASRock's Z690 PG Riptide that they sent over to us. It's big, it got 1700 pins ready to go, and it got that fancy new Z690 chipset. As the purpose of this video is solely to get an overview of ASRock's latest addition to their PG Riptide lineup, we will not get into any specific CPU benchmarks, charts or anything remotely related to actual performance. This is an overview, so let's treat it as such and use it as a later comparison for any future Z690 motherboard which may have something less or something more. Let's start off with the I/O. In the back we will start off with a bunch of audio ports featuring Realtek's ALC897 chip and a up to 7.1 channel configuration, including an optical port. Right above we will find something very important for the Z690 platform as a whole. This 2.5 gig Ethernet port. Just like the B550 PG Riptide for AMD CPUs, this Z690 board uses the same Intel killer E3100 chip that can deliver up to 2.5 gig speeds, including a bit of prioritization enhancements to get that game loading a bit quicker than the boring YouTube video you're watching on the 36 screen. Now, although that Intel killer chip is quite new, I was very happy to see that the drivers to use it are now natively integrated into a fresh Windows 11 installation. Something which was not yet the case when we got the B550 PG Riptide. And believe me, it's a real pain in the ass to get a PC going if there is no other one available in the house and there are no network drivers installed. It's Windows 2000 time. For anybody that is for some reason running around with an older Windows installer, ASRock builds in a feature called Auto Driver Installer. The idea behind this one is that the mainboard will try to install the network driver for the adapter all by itself. This then also solves the issue for anybody using an older Windows installer or for someone who's upgrading. Although I wouldn't recommend upgrading to a completely new platform, that is just odd. To get the feature going in our case, we just had to connect the LAN cable on the port on the I/O panel and voila, ASRock wants to install a couple of drivers, though there are none available because we already have the killer driver pre-installed. And can we just appreciate for a moment that ASRock did not use this opportunity to stuff your PC with bloatware and completely unnecessary tools which nobody will use. Great job. Moving on, we've got a total of 7 USB ports, 2 USB 2.0 Type A, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A, 2 USB 2.2 Gen 2 10 gig Type A, and 1 USB 3.2 Type C 20 gig. 2 of these are connected using a different controller. All of this is just called ASRock Lightning gaming ports, and what I can gather from the marketing material, it's basically a latency enhancement by splitting your keyboard and mouse over 2 different interfaces, one going straight over USB and the other one over PCIe to USB bridge. And I will leave the usefulness of this up to you. If it helps the pro gamers out there, great for them. But for me, I've never experienced mouse lag due to keyboard inputs, so I think I will be fine hooking up my mainboard wherever I want. For the rest, we've got a PS2 port and a HDMI port for those planning to use the iGPU. The last and certainly underappreciated function would be that BIOS flashback button. By using solely an USB drive and hitting that button, you can flash whatever BIOS you want on there. No CPU, no GPU, no RAM needed. Very, very useful if you have hardware compatibility issues in the future and you can solve them with a BIOS update. The Z690 PG Riptide follows the usual ASRock PG Riptide design scheme we've seen before. A lot of black color and black PCB mixed with a tiny bit of RGB and some additional black painted heatsinks. The power delivery is handled by a 13-phase design which, although following a similar heatsink design approach, looks way beefier than the B550 PG Riptides. The main attraction while using a Z690 chipset board will be its LGA1700 socket and the Intel Alder Lake support that comes with it. With the 12900, 12700 and 12600K and KF being the only available options at the time of recording. Going the Alder Lake path does come with a couple of perks though. One would be both DDR4 and DDR5 support CPU-wise, while the motherboard will then determine which one you can use. In the case of ASRock Z690 PG Riptide, this is a DDR4 motherboard with support for the usual dual channel memory over 4 slots with up to 128 gigs of Google Chrome tabs food. Another theoretically huge, although debatable, Z690 perk is the PCIe Gen 5 X16 slot, which can deliver up to 128 gigs compared to the PCIe Gen 4's measly 64 gigs. As fun as this is, with every GPU out there right now being Gen 4, and this possibly also being the case for the next generation of GPUs, this is more of a future-proof gimmick in my opinion, than actually being useful right now. For the rest, we will find another X16 slot running on PCIe Gen 4 and 3 smaller PCIe 3.0 X1 slots. Something quite noteworthy here is that if you would use both X16 slots like in a dual GPU setup, the first one would keep its Gen 5 X16 speed, while the second one would be throttled down to Gen 4 x 4. But if you would use a single card, like basically everybody out there, you could also use the second PCIe slot. And in that case, you would run on PCIe Gen 4 x 16. And with every GPU in existence not even saturating that kind of speed, we are now at the point where you can just choose whatever X16 slot you want and it won't change anything. But before we finish off the whole GPU topic, ASRock still includes the graphic cards holder, which can be installed directly to the motherboard to keep your really long GPUs from sagging down. Interesting enough, there is no overuse of the patent pending badge this time around. It seems like somebody lost on this one. In terms of storage, we get the usual M.2 madness. In the top, we've got a Hyper M.2 slot running at Gen 4 x 4 hidden underneath the heatsink. Right underneath the first 16X slot, we will find the exact same Gen 4 x 4 Hyper M.2 slot, while the leftover Ultra slot in the bottom can only run at up to Gen 3 x 4 with support for SATA 6GB. The right side of the motherboard is filled with 6 SATA 3 6GB ports, while the bottom of the board has space for the last 2. But do keep in mind that if there is a SATA M.2 in the Ultra port, the SATA port with the number 7 will be disabled. For USB and other kinds of expansion connectors, we've got 2 USB 2.0s, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1s, 1 USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type-C, and a Thunderbolt AIC connector. And although there is a boring front audio connector on the left of the board, the BIOS reset button in the right is not boring at all. This little button allows you to clear your CMOS battery and get all of that AC out of your system in case you thought that blasting 240 volts straight from your socket through your i9 was a very good idea. The last connector worth talking about are the fans and RGB headers. For RGB, ASRock installed a single 4-pin RGB header and 3 3-pin 5V RGB headers for all of those addressable devices. The two connectors are being kept fairly standard, with the 4-pin being able to output 36 watts and the 3-pin RGB ones 15 watts. Coming to the very last important thing, fan headers. In total, we have 2 headers right next to the CPU and an additional 4 spread across the whole board. Of course, all of them in PWM. Something fairly important to note here is that not all of these can output the same amount of power. The connector marked solely CPU is able to output 1 amp or 12 watts, while the other one marked as a CPU or water pump or water fan connector can output up to 2 amps or 24 watts. This makes absolutely sense, as a pump usually draws way more power than a little fan. But this is not preventing you from now installing fans into both of these. You are still fine. For the rest of the headers, which are just called chassis fan 124, these are treated exactly the same as the CPU water pump header, meaning that each of them can output up to 2 amps. I get it, but at this point we have 6 headers where there is only one of them that is unable to output 2 amps, and that just doesn't make a lot of sense. And to make things a bit weirder, the CPU fan header is also the only header which is unable to auto-detect between 3-pin and 4-pin device. So if you connect your AIO pump to the CPU fan header, it's going to do some weird stuff. But okay, this should sum it up for the ASRock Z690 overview. At this point I would like to thank ASRock for sending it over to us, and now we can finally start to do some stuff with that 12900K that is just waiting for me to finish this recording. Anyway, I hope you found what you were looking for, and hopefully see you in the next one. Bye bye.